It's a show of a reality. That is, I'm talking about some pretty epic experiences that I've had in this life and how they are the sort of thing that the current narrative of discourse in society doesn't normally speak about. That's all changing though. And as YouTube is playing a large part in those changes, many people are finding their voices with the help of the tools of YouTube. And as Martha Stewart would say, it's a good thing. In the last two episodes, I discussed meeting Muhammad Atta, who was one of the 9/11 hijackers. He took me to lunch in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and talked to me about the flight school he was in, as well as many other things. I also spoke about the fact I've had some extreme psychic visions throughout my life, starting as a small child. I mentioned that I appear to have conscious memories of being in the womb and the traumatic experiences of my twin passing on before birth. That's a difficult story for many reasons. For me, it's painful to talk about, and for some people, it's a trigger that they use to upset themselves over concepts of how consciousness works, and when is a baby actually considered a living being. I have many thoughts on all of that, though I'm not going to go too deep into that right now. Consciousness and the many aspects of it, from what I would call spiritual consciousness to mental or psychological consciousness to physical consciousness, to me, there are various forms of consciousness, and I find that people sometimes are locked into only one of those types of consciousness and fail to comprehend that there are other parts to being truly conscious, of consciously being. So this reality show of sorts, this show of reality, is about my experiences in life that tend to be too big for casual conversation. I've never been good at small talk with strangers, and if you choose to hang out with me here, as I bring forward these episodes, you're going to see why. I'm going to talk about me often, but it's not all about me. My hopes are that those that have had experiences that are not openly discussed in society may find their voices in hearing my voice. Years ago, I was interviewed on a radio show that had a small in-studio audience. And an older man that was there to listen to one of his friends that was also on the show came up to me after and in a whisper confessed to me that he has had various experiences like what I discussed on the radio show. And in hearing and seeing me talk, he suddenly realized he was not crazy. He said he had no clue what I was going to talk about, but he had decided to stay and listen to the whole show. And not just his friend's part of the show, the majority of his life he had been hiding what was going on within him from his wife and his children and friends. I was the first person he ever told about such an extreme part of his life. He held all of that within him so much of his life and feared he was crazy. I literally have to give myself pause and center and ground myself before I tell this story. If I don't, I'll break down and cry over it. There are so many people hiding the truth of their experiences in life from others, including the people closest to them. Some of those people are hiding the truth of their experiences even from themselves. I can say this because I have experienced this myself. Speaking like this allows me to come forward and live more authentically in my life, to make space within society, and at times it allows me to even hear myself. Many of my experiences in life have been so extreme, it was difficult for me to process them and to put them in a place of comprehension, and even order. We often try to place things in life in a linear order, though life is part of a multidimensional reality and not really as linear as we might assume or try to make it. As a small child, I had visions into much of my life and saw and felt through those visions. I saw and felt through the ego states I had during the periods I was seeing into. I saw and felt the fears I was dealing with during the times I was seeing into, and I also had to process the fears I had from seeing into those things. There were times as a small child where my perspective that I had limited my grasping of what I was seeing into. And then there were times I saw into things seemingly beyond perspectives. For example, I had moments of being like a small child, being 5 years old, and then suddenly having moments where I was seeing into my sex life later in life. That in of itself was a major shock being a small child, never mind dealing with that stuff as an adult. I've never openly discussed this before, and I may go into it more in detail when I'm prepared for it, because it needs a large amount of context to explain it, as well as showing various perceptions of it. But as a small child, I had experiences where I saw into how, in the future, many younger people would feel they needed to create pornographic videos to exploit themselves to survive and to make a living. I saw how in the future, some people would make any type of video they could to try to make money, and even for some to try to gain attention and love from others. And for some of those people who craved attention, they would literally feed off of the attention and lose themselves in the process. And all that has happened for many people, and I saw into it and tried to grasp and comprehend it when I was a toddler. There was a period that I was seeing into of all of that where I was confused, as if in the future the world would be so bleak that the only way to survive it was to make sure you had a good source to feed from. It was confusing to me because I was also seeing and hearing spirits talk to me about things. So as a child, not only was I dealing with extreme epic visions into my future, I was learning how to discern the realms of spirit that I was very much open to. I was learning to discern what was right and wrong to me and why. I even was learning about the energy we feed from in life and whether it would truly nourish and sustain us or make us subjugated to another force of energy. That itself could be a whole series of future videos. In what I just said, it should be easy to realize that I was hearing many voices from the realms of spirit coming forward to either assist me or lead me astray. Even though I was a small child, or maybe I should say, even though I appeared as a small child, I had certain discernment that didn't seem like it was coming from the little kid, but rather a deeper part of the being who was being as if a small child. I sometimes seemed to know things, as if it was knowledge from deeper parts of me that lived other lives and were other ages as well. I remember consciously in my head, and sometimes out loud, arguing with the spirits I was seeing and hearing. There were things I was hearing or being told that just didn't sound right to me. Bringing those things up to the adults around me was often a hazardous experience, and I learned soon to be careful of that prospect. I kept seeing into my future, not liking or comprehending who I was seeing I would be in my early adulthood. But I would keep seeing the very few people that were there for me in my future. I saw and felt into how difficult those periods of my life would be, but I saw there was at least a few people who really cared about me. And when Spirit was telling me my life didn't have to be that way, I felt I had to go there anyhow. For those people that I saw and felt loved me in my future, I remember vividly at one point telling the spirits that I was willing to go to hell if that's where my friends were being forced to go. I proclaimed that love was more important and our souls would be saved with love. I was just a small child, and those are my childhood memories. Of course, I also have childhood memories of being angry at what I saw coming in the world at me. I have memories of being lost and trying to be a little kid. I have memories of deep confusion and feelings of loss that I couldn't comprehend. I have memories of just being a dumb little kid who didn't know how to interact with others. I learned to silence myself so others wouldn't react or trigger themselves and then blame me for it. I even learned to silence myself from myself so I didn't see or feel what I was truly feeling and seeing. I learned to hide from my own senses at times to try to be quietly fitting into the horrifying society I saw coming at me as a child. I do have some pretty horrid memories of conversations I had with some adults as a child about things I was seeing into the future and the terrible guidance they offered. Now, much later in this timeline of life, and having lived through many of those things I saw, and the bad guidance I was offered, I have seen much more of why that guidance would have been horrific for me if I chose those routes. Some of that I cannot go into because some of those adults are still alive. It would not be good for their current state of consciousness that they hold to hear it being discussed. Even if I didn't name them, it would serve no good purpose in explaining it any deeper at this time. Not all people, or even disembodied spirits, have our best interests. Sometimes it's because they know no better, and sometimes it's because their survival or wants and needs are more important to them than ours. This is why opening to the realms of spirit when one fails to have the abilities of response, the responsibilities, can be dangerous. And I do say responsibilities because our abilities of response in life are what we are able to have responsibilities for. Though, many people take on responsibilities that they fail to have the abilities of response for. Then, after much drama, those people will often wonder why they can't handle those responsibilities they took on. That is setting oneself up for failure. Learning to gain and have abilities of response in life is crucial in being responsible for our lives. In another episode, I'll go deeper into how using drugs, especially many of those types that people use for trying to open their mind's eye and spirit to the spirit realm, are dangerous. As an empathic therapist, I am often hearing people ask me about this and claiming how shamans have done it for a long time, so it must be okay. This is an extremely in-depth discussion, which many of those people are not willing to seriously have an ability of response, of responsibility to consider. If you fail to realize you're actually coming from the realm of spirit to begin with, and part of that has to do with the fact you have blinders on for what is actually all around you already, ripping those blinders off with drugs when you don't have abilities of response for what's there to begin with, when you fail to fully have abilities of response for what you do know is around you as well, never mind, it is possibly going to make you a meal for something that would feed off of you while you're unaware of it. Whenever someone has this discussion with me, I always remember the time I met the rock star Prince. And I had the same discussion with him when he wanted me to hang out with him, and I said no. I told him that I sensed he did drugs, and I couldn't be around that energy and what can be attached to it. He didn't want to listen, and I ended up telling him he would die in an elevator if he continued to do drugs. He told me if that's the way I'm supposed to go. I explained, as he was walking away, I'm trying to tell you that you don't have to go that way. And that is the way he died, in an elevator in his house from a drug reaction. The curious thing about this is that I saw and knew all of this when I was a little kid when I saw it in visions. I knew I would meet a man someday by the name of Prince many years before he was even famous, and I would try to forewarn him of how he would die. As a teenager, I bought his album Purple Rain when it came out because I wanted to honor him, knowing I would meet him later in life and try to help him. I even knew I would tell the story about meeting him later in life. I think I said earlier in this conversation, I'm not very good at mingling in small talk. Many people have a memory of when they got really upset and tried to run away as a small child. Well, I have one of those too. I was born in 1964, and in 1969, when I was 5, the song The Age of Aquarius, also known as Let the Sunshine In by the group The Fifth Dimension, came out. At some point, when I heard it on the radio, I felt like they were singing it to me. It even felt like it was written for me. I had spirit tell me things about how my future would be brighter than my fears suggested. I heard that there would be people to help me. I heard things mentioned about the actual fifth dimension and how in the future many people would be talking about it. I even had visions of seeing into me being an adult and spending time out west in Sedona, Arizona. I saw that I would go through so much unimaginable, yet I was seeing into it, problems, before I would get to go to what felt like a safe haven of Sedona, Arizona. I somehow knew this group, the fifth dimension, was somewhere out west, and if I was careful, I could go find them and they could help me. I felt if I ran away to Sedona, then as a child, I might not have to go through all the pain and suffering I was seeing I was going to have to experience in life. I got to the end of our long dirt driveway in what felt like a much longer walk than it was, before I was able to process and comprehend that I wouldn't be safe alone if I tried going there as a child. Spirit explained very much in many ways what I would encounter if I did try it alone. One of the weird things, if all this isn't all weird enough, and too much for the average person to consider being real, often when I tell a story of things that I have actually experienced in life, there's much more to the story than I often tell, due to its already extreme and complex enough. There's a story I tell at times of one of those visions I had at Sedona, which was seeing into a very difficult moment I was going to have there, and how when I finally lived through and experienced that exact painful moment I had, I burst out laughing because I was living that moment and I knew I would survive it. My conversation with Prince went into past lives and even how he was named Prince, yet how I remembered and saw through lives of various kings since childhood. He then told me how he first was introduced to the psychoactive drug ayahuasca by a relative as a child, and then he offered to assist me with it to better open to those past lives I was experiencing in seemingly mine. I'm not going to tell people what to do on all this, but I will explain some of the ramifications one may have to deal with. You can believe what you want, but since being a small child, I saw the ramifications of it on Prince. As wonderful as he was and is in many others, many people are risking their lives and their true connections to their souls to be glamored for fed upon illusions from things that know no better. When I say glamored, I do mean it in the truest definition of the word, which is often properly used in vampire movies, where the victim is glamored into submission to be okay with being fed upon while being anesthetized in the process of it. So, if that experience of meeting Prince wasn't strange enough for a kid from a small country town, right after that, I had another extreme experience, which I will go into in a future episode of this show of reality. Though, I will give a preview and explain I was at a club full of famous people in California at the time of meeting Prince. And I turned from Prince overwhelmed with what just happened, and then met and had a very strange encounter with another famous man on the dance floor who turned out to be one of my next door neighbors when I was a kid. For whatever reason, I've had many strange experiences meeting famous or soon to be infamous people. One of my psychologists has told me on multiple times he believed it had to do with the past lives I see through. In the future, I very may well go into discussing some of those encounters, like meeting Rosie O'Donnell in the store I owned back when she had the Rosie Show, all while I was being overwhelmed from having visions. She walks in and I actually insulted her, and then years later, hearing her discuss it when she was on the TV show The View. During that time period, I owned a store in a major mall in a large city near where I lived. Because the mall was next to a large civic center, many famous people often came through the mall and ended up in my store. During that period, I was suffering again from having many visions, like seeing Princess Diana dying in the car crash the Sunday before it happened. I was going through a period of reckoning with all the visions I had already as a child that I had suppressed even from myself. All those memories started tumbling back out of me as I was having a series of other new visions and seeing those things play out around me and in the world. I'd take breaks from trying to run a store and take a walk in the mall to end up astral projecting out of my body while walking and having the people around me see it happen and react to it. There was no getting away or suppressing what was happening to me anymore. I had to learn to take responsibility, gain abilities of response for what was happening to me since I was a small child. The more I suppressed and hid from myself, the more dangerous it became for me. So sometimes meeting new people during that time period of my life was a bit chaotic for me, especially meeting famous people, since I tend to carry a bigger energetic charge than your average person. I literally had Stephen Hawking chase after me in his motorized wheelchair as he was trying to get to know me due to something I said to him, and I couldn't deal with what I was feeling and seeing regarding myself in the process of it. I look back at that in amazement of what an interesting friend he could have been in my life if I had allowed it. I had to give up those stores I owned during that time period because the visions became too large again. And I needed to find the space to start overcoming not only the PTSD from my earlier life, but to learn to comprehend that I actually suffered pre-PTSD as a small child from seeing and empathically feeling into much of my future life and the suffering and the PTSD I would endure to get to this current stage of my life. Later in life, I once again chose to give up another store I created and just focus on my life and the students and clients that I had. Months earlier, I met the older brother of the Boston Marathon bombing. He came into that store and we had a rather strange interaction. Then in the spring, I had a vision in front of one of my friends the night before the Boston Marathon, and I felt like I exploded. Much unfolded and unraveled within me for weeks after, as I came to grips and comprehension of all that I actually experienced in meeting that man. I decided I needed space between me and just anyone that could walk in the door of my store. Closing the store and going appointment only for clients and students gave me the space I needed, though it was a financial loss at the same time. Trying to work to survive financially and deal with all the things I have dealt with in this life has been extremely difficult. It's not easy working for other people when you're empathic, never mind when you have visions and sometimes see and hear spirits. One of my closest friends told me a story once about one of his bosses. I had met the man on several occasions, and it appeared he liked and paid extra attention to me. I felt sincere respect from him. So my friend told me how this boss kept telling him that he wanted to hire me to run one of the departments at work. My friend said he kept blowing it off whenever it was brought up. Then one day, when his boss mentioned it again, he told him something on the lines of, "Listen, if you hired Keith, he would end up coming into your office within a few days and telling you everything that is wrong with the department and what you need to do to fix it. He would be totally right, but the issue is you wouldn't want to hear what he said." I burst out laughing when he told me this because that is so often my experience in life. Another time, I went to that place of business and I needed to buy something. And I'll not tell the full story to protect the innocent, so to speak, and that is dry humor. But I went up to one of the clerks and asked for something and was told they couldn't do that for me due to a new company policy. Standing there in shock, I called my friend on my cell phone as other customers took my place in line, and I told him about what just happened. The clerk kept looking at me oddly. My friend on the other end of the phone said, "Hold on." Then as he came back on the line, the boss of the store walks up to me and says, "Hello," using my name, and asked me what I needed. I told him what I wanted, and he turned to the clerk and told him to do it for me. The clerk resisted and said he wasn't supposed to. He then looked at the clerk and said, "Who am I?" The clerk looked confused and said, "My boss." And then his boss asked, "What do I do?" And the clerk said, "You run this place," which he was then told, "Yes, so do what I tell you." I stood there dumbfounded with the clerk looking at me, wondering who the hell I was and how I wielded so much power. I don't think I ever saw that coming. Now, of course, that's more of a simple story of weirdness, but I've been in situations working for other people and being told to do something when I already know what I'm being told to do won't work. I can literally see and sense it, but I have to go through the whole monotonous routine anyhow because it's not my job to know any better. It's not my job to question. It's not my pay scale that I'm being allowed. Yet somehow I could be the one saving the company a good amount of money and time from experiences I've had. My close friends know that if they need to buy a used car, they should bring me with them when they go looking. I can empathically tell you all sorts of things about the car and the previous owner and what that means for the condition of the car and what you're going to have to deal with energetically driving the car. Using white sage and energetically clearing the car is important, but some things are not worth trying to sage or energetically clear. I've had a used car salesman somewhat freak out when I admitted I knew what the former owner did for work because I could see and sense it in the car. I've been able to prove there was hidden damage on a Mercedes because I could feel how the former owner drove off the side of the road and damaged the passenger side when he had a heart attack while he was driving. I saw that just walking up to the car. On an in-depth inspection of the area I claimed was damaged, you could still see an area under the car that the new touch-up paint job didn't cover. I've made a friend bring back a black convertible BMW that he bought at auction for not much money because I could see and feel the former owner of it was a drug dealer and there was even a demon involved in his life. If I recall right, I also pointed out a bullet hole in the car. There was no way I was allowing my friend to own, never mind drive, that car. Houses are another story. If you're going to buy a house, you really should hire me to go with you before you close the deal. It amazes me how many people buy houses and have no clue of what's energetically in the house, never mind what's happened in the house. Looking at houses for myself has been an ordeal of soap opera proportions. I've literally ran out of a couple houses before due to what was in them. Some houses truly need to be burnt down to get rid of the energetic charges that are imprinted in the walls. They can be fascinating as well to experience, but fascination can also be a trap. As I grew up, I learned that when people invite me over to their house, I really don't always want a tour of the house. And please, I probably don't want to see your bedroom, because if you don't know how to energetically clear that space, I really don't want to experience what I'm going to experience in there. I at times try to politely refuse invitations to some people's houses because I know I already would be overwhelmed by what I would experience of them in their own house. I mean no offense to the person when I try to get out of the invitation, but sometimes I have to protect me over their innocent dinner invitation. Hammond Castle in Gloucester, Massachusetts is like that. I went on a tour there once with a friend, and the tour guide kept confirming all the things I was sensing. When we got to one of the guest rooms, I literally stepped back a bit aghast. I was seeing a famous actress and a man in the middle of a secret sex affair. Then it was like a porn movie opened up all around me, and I literally had to speak out loud to distance myself from it. The tour guide mentioned the name of the actress that I was seeing, who was in a very compromising position, and he alluded to the affair. I couldn't stop myself from saying out loud, "That's who I saw. That's her name." I couldn't remember it. It's how a bit weird for me whenever I see her mentioned from any of her movies or claims to fame. She was a very interesting woman and ahead of her times, though I really didn't need to know her that well. When I was a teenager, one night I once slept on the sofa of one of my mom's friends. In the middle of the night, I woke up yelling, "Please, enough already. Can you just finish?" The husband, a rather good-looking, very masculine man, came running into the living room and asked me what I just said. Without even realizing how openly honest I was being, I told him I couldn't handle the sex any longer, that it was taking too long, and could he just finish with it already? It was as if I was in the middle of it and I was the one he was on top of. It was empathically overwhelming to me. That morning, when he dropped me off at my house, we had a very strange, long talk in the car, and I basically channeled awareness from deep within me that was well beyond the teenager I was appearing to be. And in his amazement, he confessed that I was more of a man than he would ever have thought to be, which was a curious thing for the teenager, me, to hear, due to how others openly treated and abused me during that period of life. Growing up, I experienced so many things that people do not openly discuss, if they even know about things of this nature. Even though I grew up in a small country town, when I got older, I was fortunate to get to go to some other places in the world. I'd love to be able to afford to travel more, especially to go to more places I remember in what seemed to be other lives I see through. But I have been fortunate to go to places like Sedona, Arizona, as I saw ahead of as a small child, where there are a good amount of people who are more consciously aware of the realms of spirit and what is truly going on in the world. Though some of those people do lack discernment and open themselves to things that create drama and sometimes death. While Sedona is an amazing place, one does need abilities of response for what is there. As the old saying goes, all that glitters is not gold. One of my favorite places is Lilydale, New York. It's a spiritualist community full full of people that are mediums and work with their senses. You can go to a local coffee shop and have a conversation like I'm having now, and no one is going to call you crazy. I actually sat there once with Shirley MacLaine, not admitting who she was, sitting next to me, though I wasn't so sure she thought I was sane, since I wasn't filtering much of what I said. I used to have this very weird thing happen, where if I spoke too openly, I would have people tell me that I was making up what I said. When I asked why they thought I was making it up, they would tell me it was because if what I said was true, then I would be famous. And since I'm not famous, I must be making it up. When that happened, I always thought that was a curious way to try to make sense of what was true or not. When I would go to bigger name psychics, I would often be told I was supposed to be speaking my truths, and even speaking them on the world stage, due to the things I could say. I heard that so many times, and then strangers would tell me that I was crazy when I spoke openly, or I was looking for attention. Then my clients would have experiences so large, they wouldn't tell anyone about them. I would joke that I didn't get a good amount of word of mouth because it was too much for people to handle and speak about openly. It seemed if I did get word of mouth, it was from the people that didn't like having to come to terms with the fact that they were not behaving as nice people, and it would come up in their sessions with me. I lost count how many people I would encounter at times that would come to circles, classes, and events, and then have the other attendees later ask me if that person was coming to the next one. Because if they were, they needed to know ahead so they wouldn't go. It's not easy trying to explain why no one is coming back to class because they don't want to deal with that person who's asking why they're the only one in class now. So to them, they walk away thinking my classes are not good because no one comes back to them, when it's them keeping the people away from that class. Boundaries can be a curious thing to try to teach people. Often in empathic and psychic readings, my aim is not to tell people what I see, but rather to help them see and sense for themselves. As well, sometimes readings are more therapy sessions, or even in-depth conversations, trying to assist the person in looking at the questions they have in life to see that how they are forming the questions are actually blocking the answers themselves. I once did such a good job with that with a lady, helping her to see more clearly, yet not telling her what to see or what I was seeing, that at the end of the session as she paid me, I heard her in my head say to herself, "Why am I paying him for things I already knew?" I learned from that experience to reconfirm with people throughout the session the things they were suddenly coming to terms with, into how it was happening, so that they could find validation in how I was holding space, so they could see what I was actually helping them with. I sometimes call that a reorientation of consciousness to where one's origin actually is. It's becoming spiritually conscious from the realms of spirit, to see and perceive one's life from where they're coming from, as opposed to looking backwards into life and being lost within the convoluted nature of that. When people say go within, I often think we're coming from there to begin with. The more we can de-thread, so to speak, from being lost in the illusions and even wake from our own dreams, never mind the dreams that others have force projected onto the world and created a space where many of us subjugate our existence to the other person's dreams. To more we can multidimensionally see who and what we are and where we're actually coming from, our soul. The Hollywood movie Inception opens a portal of what all that can mean. While I have had many people in life make fun of me and call me crazy for things they know nothing of, all while claiming to know something about those things they have no experience of, I have had many people as well show me they know much more than they're letting on. Growing up, that was one of the weirdest things for me to try to make sense of. I would have strangers approach me and call me by one of the names I had been seeing into from past lives. I would overhear people make comments that were about me, that were about things I was even hiding from myself. And I'm talking about things I'd already sensed were coming in my life, yet I was hiding from the consciousness of knowing it. As a little kid, I used to often be called Kevin. My name is Keith, but apparently since the name Kevin is more popular, people not paying attention to me would call me Kevin. Still, even today, I have people at times call me Kevin. But there got to a point when I was a little kid, I became so frustrated with people calling me Kevin. As it was, I felt like I was not being seen or heard or listened to or even paid attention to with all the extreme things I was dealing with in life. It was like people were telling me I didn't matter. I was seeing all the pain and suffering I was going to have to deal with growing up, and it seemed like I wasn't even being allowed my own sense of presence in the world. I could really go deep into how I felt affected by that. But one day, I became so tired of being called Kevin that I thought to myself, I don't want to be called Kevin. I'm tired of people calling me Kevin. I don't want to be called Kevin. I repeated it fast in my head over and over, and then finally said with a burst of energy, I don't want to be called Kevin anymore. I may have even yelled it out loud at that point, and I really think I did. But I remember vividly, once I thought, I don't want to be called Kevin anymore, I saw into the future, and I saw a Kevin Moore that I would meet later in life. I saw things about him. I saw things about how his family had synchronicities with my family. His mom had the same name as my mom. His sister that was going to pass away had the same name as my stepsister that was going to pass away. My stepsister died while babysitting. His sister died while pregnant. There were so many things I saw that connected, many more than I can consciously even remember now, and many more than I possibly should even admit. I saw how he would come into my life at a period where I needed someone to help me, to even protect me. I saw a blessing in him. I as well saw into a later vision I would have with him at 19 that I would deal with him and his sister who would pass on. At some point during those weeks of dealing with that new awareness, I also saw in a vision that I would be put in a mental hospital for 3 months after that vision at 19 by a family member because they would think I was crazy when I was just trying to process and deal with a massive vision I just had. So yes, the right and the ability to be truly present in life can be complex, even more complex when you consciously deal with the multidimensionality of your being. So as I said a little while ago, there were times in my life I would overhear people make comments that were about me, that were about things I was even hiding from myself. And I'm talking about things I had already sensed were coming in my life. So before I officially met Kevin, I at times would overhear people comment to someone else about when I would finally meet Kevin, how things would change in my life. Once I overheard it, and the other person it was being told to chastised the person for speaking openly about it. At times, I would overhear all sorts of things that how would those people know? People acted like they didn't know things, but then I would catch things that showed they knew much more than they were letting on. The world around me seemed to be trying to tell me I was crazy for thinking I had the abilities that I was trying to repress. And at the same time, I was having glimpses into other people around me seeming to know things that they would openly deny. Do you know how crazy that can make you feel when you're already dealing with sensory things? The society around me was driving me crazy. Well, the first time I saw into the movie The Truman Show, a show that was about a reality show of a man who didn't know he was the star of it, I pretty much freaked myself out. I literally felt like the movie was possibly a joke about my own life and how I was being played and gaslit in it. Now, do you start to get why I'm creating this series of videos as a show of reality? The first time I saw the movie, the first 50 dates, I was deeply traumatized. I spent so much of my life seeing into things and then having to let go of them and moving on to then have those things come back and letting them go again due to the epic nature of them, and then having to live through them when they finally emerge. It was like the scenario of the movie to me. The struggle of being conscious in a multidimensional reality that keeps shifting deeper on you. Seeing and feeling forward into my future before it happens. Dealing with it happening as it plays out, and at the same time seeing into the past in what seems like my own lives in other epic lifetimes. seeing and feeling into those lifetimes and realizing the abilities and disabilities I have in this current flow of time is so similar yet different than those of the other lifetimes I'm conscious from within. Trying to cling to a more expanded consciousness of light to have it slip away as I saw and felt the onslaught of society coming at me. I once had a well-known psychic tell me I'm like a Russian nesting doll. Though maybe we all are, in truth. I'm speaking a good amount of me and I in this series of videos, and that is part of coming forward more clearly in life when you have lived so many years as if a half-life, of not really existing in front of others. We have a right to be present, to have a seat at the table. We're all in this together, and we can learn and gain from each other if we're willing. When I published my autobiography years ago, some of the first reviews on Amazon claimed that it was all about me. Yeah, it's an autobiography. Someone who obviously didn't read it all said it was like a child wrote it. Yes, portions of it were told from the ego states of the experiences that were written about, and I'm not ashamed of that, nor should I be. I had a lawyer who said he couldn't put the book down, personally asked me how much of it was real versus metaphor. I stated it's all my real experiences and my thoughts of them. I hope these things I confess, these things I bear my soul of, have things in them that can assist you in your own alignment and process of your being, if indeed that is what you're looking for in life. Possibly you have had various experiences that are similar in ways, and hearing another speak of their journey can help you. Maybe it will help you realize you have a right to have your own voice as well. And then there is the art of just holding space for another to be present in front of you. That is a blessing for everyone willing to hold that space of humanity for humanity. Thank you for sitting with me here in my show of reality.